The day my brother graduated from medical school was supposed to be the happiest day of our family's life, and it was just not in the way my sister-in-law's family had planned. I remember standing outside the university's auditorium in my navy blue dress, the one I'd bought on clearance at Target 3 weeks before, because I didn't own anything that felt occasion-worthy enough. My mother was already crying before we even found our seats, dabbing at her eyes with a folded paper towel she'd tucked into her purse. My father had driven 4 hours from Baton Rouge in his old Chevy, wearing the sport coat he only brought out for funerals and things he considered equally serious. We were not a wealthy family. That was never a secret to anyone, least of all us. My brother had worked his way through undergrad on scholarships and overnight shifts at the hotel front desk. Medical school had been loans, grants, a part-time research assistant job that paid $12 an hour. Our parents had sacrificed in ways I only understood now that I was older. My mother eating crackers and peanut butter for lunch for years, so there was enough left for groceries. My father taking on weekend plumbing jobs that wrecked his knees so my brother could focus on studying instead of worrying. We knew what it cost. We were proud of every cent of it. My brother's girlfriend, now fiancée as of 6 months ago, came from a different kind of background entirely. Her father owned 3 car dealerships in the Atlanta suburbs and a vacation house in Hilton Head. Her mother served on 2 nonprofit boards and had her nails done every Thursday without fail. They were not unkind people, exactly, but they had a way of making you aware of the distance between your world and theirs without ever saying anything directly. A certain pause when my mother mentioned she worked at the school cafeteria. A certain smile when my father talked about retirement, meaning he could finally fix up the house himself. Her name was Claire. She was beautiful and sharp and genuinely loved my brother. I believed that then, I believe it now. But her parents had raised her in an atmosphere where financial comfort was so expected it had become invisible to her. The way people raised near the ocean stopped noticing the smell of salt. Claire's family had reserved an entire row near the front of the auditorium. They'd arrived early with the photographer they'd hired for the day. Her mother, a tall woman in a cream blazer, had organized a celebratory dinner reservation at a restaurant downtown that I later looked up and found required a 2-week booking and charged $45 for a pasta dish. The plan, loosely stated by Claire the week before, was that everyone would go together. One big family celebration. We found seats 3 rows behind them. I noticed Claire's father glance back at us when we sat down. Not rudely, just the way someone takes inventory of a room. He nodded at my father. My father nodded back. That was the full extent of it. The ceremony was long and beautiful. When my brother's name was called, Dr. Tagejun, Marcus James Whitfield, and I'm changing his name here because he asked me to, but the moment was real. My mother made a sound I had never heard from her before. Something between a laugh and a sob that she immediately muffled with her paper towel. My father put his arm around her and looked straight ahead, and I could see the muscles in his jaw working. I cried too, quietly, the kind of crying you do when you're also smiling. Afterward, in the courtyard outside, families clustered together for photographs. Claire's parents were already positioned near a stone archway here, mother directing the photographer with the ease of someone used to being in charge of beautiful things. Claire waved us over, and I watched the small rearrangement that happened. Subtle, almost unconscious, as her family shifted slightly to maintain their central position in the frame. My mother stood at the edge of the photo. I stood next to her. It was during the waiting period before dinner, when people were milling around the courtyard with glasses of sparkling water provided by the university, that it happened. Claire's father was talking with 2 other men. Other fathers, I assumed, from the way they carried themselves. I was standing nearby, not quite part of any conversation, holding my mother's purse while she stepped away to use the restroom. I wasn't eavesdropping. I was just closing off. "Whose people are those?" one of the men asked, and I didn't realize at first he was referring to us. "The doctor's family," Claire's father said. There was something in the way he said it, not mean but flattened, like he was reading a label of a generic product. They drove up from Louisiana, the other man said, as if that explained something. Yeah. Claire's father swirled his water. Good people, I'm sure. Just he glanced over, and for a half second his eyes landed on me before sliding away. Different circumstances. Claire's going to have to do a lot of the heavy lifting in this family. Financially, socially, you know how it is. I did not move. I was very good at not moving. Her parents seem like they've never been to a place like this before. The first man added, and laughed, not cruelly, just carelessly, the way people laugh when they don't think anyone who matters is listening. I picked up my mother's purse from where I'd set it on a low wall. I straightened my dress. I walked slowly to the other side of the courtyard where my father was looking at the bronze plaque on the wall, reading it carefully the way he always did with anything written because he genuinely liked to learn things. What's it say? I asked him. History of the medical school, he said. Goes back to 1838. Huh, I said. And I stood there next to him and read it too. I didn't say anything to anyone about what I'd heard. Not to my brother. He was too happy and it wasn't his fault, and I wasn't going to put that weight on the best day of his professional life. Not to my mother. She would have been crushed and then angry, and neither of those things would have helped. Not to Claire. Because whatever I might have thought in that moment, I wasn't sure it was a battle worth starting at someone else's graduation. I just carried it. Quietly. The way I'd learned to carry a lot of things. Dinner was at a restaurant called Hargrove's, which I did not think was a real name for a restaurant until I saw it on the awning. The interior was the kind of dim that made everything feel expensive. The menus didn't have prices on them, which I'd heard about but never actually encountered. My mother looked at hers for a long moment and then set it down and waited to see what other people ordered. Claire's family had organized the seating. Her parents were at the head of the long table, my brother and Claire beside them, and then the rest of us arranged outward, like the social importance of each person decreased with distance from the center. My parents and I were at the far end, near a pillar. It was fine. The food was good. The conversation flowed easily enough, although most of it happened at the other end of the table where toasts were made and memories were shared about Claire and my brother's relationship. How they met through mutual friends at a fundraiser. How Claire's father had taken my brother out for golf to get to know him. How my brother had passed whatever quiet evaluation that constituted. My father ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, which still cost more than he spent on groceries in a week, and ate it without complaint and said it was very good when the waiter asked. My mother smiled throughout everything and complimented Claire's dress twice and asked her mother polite questions about her non-profit work. I watched them both and felt something I didn't have a clean name for. A mixture of love and grief and a determination I couldn't quite articulate yet. When Claire's father stood for a toast, he talked about the future. About the kind of life Claire and my brother were going to build, about expectations, in a way that sounded like encouragement but carried the slight weight of a reminder. He mentioned their plans to settle in Atlanta. He mentioned the neighborhood they were looking at. He raised his glass and said, "To the family we're all building together," and looked down the table toward us as he said it. A gesture of inclusion that somehow felt like the opposite. My brother caught my eye from across the table. He knew me well enough to read something in my face, though I'd kept it as neutral as I could. He gave me a small look, the shorthand we'd developed as kids, the one that meant I see you, hold on. And I gave him a small nod back. I held on. What none of Claire's family knew, and what I had not told anyone outside my immediate family because it genuinely hadn't come up and I didn't make a habit of leading with it, was what I did for a living. I was 31. I had a graduate degree in financial analysis from Georgetown, which I'd gotten on a merit fellowship. For the past 4 years, I had worked as a senior analyst at a private equity firm headquartered in Washington, D.C. I specialized in acquisitions, specifically in identifying undervalued companies, assessing their structural vulnerabilities, and developing the financial models that guided whether and how to pursue them. I was not Claire's father, with his dealerships and his vacation house. But I was good at my job in a way that was beginning to have real consequences in the world. And 3 weeks before my brother's graduation, I had been the lead analyst on a deal that my firm had just closed. The deal involved a regional automotive group in the Southeast, 7 locations, strong cash flow, underperforming in 2 key markets, ripe for the kind of restructuring that would significantly increase its value over the next 18 months. The automotive group included 2 of Claire's father's car dealerships. I had known this going in. I had flagged it to my supervisor as a potential conflict of interest because of my brother's relationship with Claire. My supervisor had reviewed it, consulted with our compliance team, and determined that because I had no direct financial relationship with Claire's father and because the deal was already well into the pipeline, I could continue in my analytical role. I was not the decision maker, I was the analyst. The firm had proceeded. The deal had closed on a Friday. My brother's graduation was the following Saturday. Claire's father did not yet know that among the new majority stakeholders in his business was the firm where his future daughter-in-law's sister worked. He found out at 9:47 p.m. We had finished dinner. We were in that extended after-dinner moment where some people had ordered dessert and others were on their second coffee, and the conversation had grown more relaxed and wandering. I was speaking with my mother about whether we should start the drive back that night or get a hotel, keeping my voice low so as not to seem like we were rushing away. My phone buzzed. A text from my colleague Jordan. Not a name I'm changing because he told me I could use it, who said simply, he got the notification. Reached out to his lawyer. You may want to heads up your family. I read it twice. I set my phone face down on the tablecloth. Across the table, I watched Claire's father reach into his breast pocket for his own phone. I watched him read something. I watched the color change in his face, not dramatically, not like in a movie, but a real and subtle draining that I recognized because I had seen it in boardrooms when someone received news they had not prepared for. He excused himself from the table. He was gone for 11 minutes. I know because I was watching the clock on my phone. When he came back, he sat down heavily. His wife looked at him. He said something to her quietly that I couldn't hear. She set down her dessert fork. He looked down the table at me. I looked back at him. There was a long moment where neither of us said anything, and I think in that moment he was reassessing something, running back through the evening, through everything he'd assumed, through the mental file he'd built of the doctor's family from Louisiana and what they represented and what they didn't. Megan, he said, and that is my real name, or close enough. What did you say you do again? I work in private equity, I said. Acquisitions mostly. Another pause. Which firm? I told him. He was quiet for a moment that stretched in a way that made the surrounding conversation seem very far away. You were on the Meridian Group deal, he said. It wasn't a question. I was the lead analyst, I said. I flagged the connection to my supervisor before we proceeded. Everything was handled through proper channels. My brother was looking back and forth between us. Claire had gone very still. My mother, bless her, was looking at the dessert menu and hadn't fully registered what was happening. I see, Claire's father said. He picked up his wine glass. He set it back down without drinking from it. Your parents must be very proud of you both, he said finally, and his voice had changed. Something that had been smooth in it had become careful. They are, I said, and we're proud of them. My father, who had been listening to a story from Claire's uncle about a fishing trip, turned at the sound of his name implied. He looked at me. I gave him the smallest possible smile. He looked at Claire's father. He nodded once, the same way he'd nodded in the auditorium, quiet and unimpressed by things that were supposed to impress him, as he had always been. The dinner ended not long after. There were hugs and photographs and promises to coordinate on the engagement party, which Claire and my brother were planning for the spring. Claire's mother hugged my mother warmly. more warmly than she had at any point in the evening, and said she hoped we'd have a chance to really sit down together soon. In the parking lot, my father unlocked the Chevy and held the door for my mother, the way he always did. "What was that about?" my mother asked, once we were inside with the doors closed. "Nothing," I said. "Work stuff. You work too much," she said, which was her way of saying she was proud of me and didn't know exactly how to say it. My father pulled out of the parking lot without a word. The highway stretched ahead of us, lit by the pale wash of headlights. My mother fell asleep before we hit the interstate, her head tipped against the window the way she used to sleep on long drives when we were kids. I sat in the back seat and looked out at the dark fields passing by. I thought about what Claire's father had said in the courtyard, about heavy lifting, about different circumstances, about the things he'd assumed when he looked at us and filed us away under a category he thought he already understood. I thought about my mother eating crackers for lunch so there'd be enough for dinner. I thought about my father's knees. I thought about my brother, standing at that podium in his graduation gown, and the sound my mother made when his name was called. Some things you carry quietly for a long time, not because you have no choice, but because you understand that the right moment isn't always the loudest one. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply keep going. Keep working, keep building, keep showing up, until the world catches up to what you already knew about yourself. Claire's father called my brother the next morning. I don't know everything that was said, but my brother told me later that it was a long conversation, and that somewhere in the middle of it, his future father-in-law said, "I didn't realize how accomplished your sister was." My brother said he laughed. "She's always been the smartest person in the room," he told him. "Our family just doesn't advertise." I keep thinking about my father reading that bronze plaque on the wall. That image stays with me more than anything else from that day. More than the restaurant with no prices on the menu. More than the photographer Claire's family hired. More than the moment I watched the color drain from a man's face when he realized what he didn't know about us. My father reads everything, he always has. Cereal boxes at breakfast, historical markers on road trips, the fine print on anything anyone hands him. Not because he's trying to prove something, but because he genuinely wants to understand the world around him. He left school at 16 to help support his family. He taught himself plumbing from library books. He raised 2 kids on the belief that knowledge was the one thing nobody could take from you. And he lived that belief so quietly and so completely that it never occurred to him to announce it. That's what I came from. That's what Claire's father looked at and filed away under different circumstances. I don't think he was a bad person. I've thought about this a lot since that night, and I don't think cruelty was what drove him. It was something more ordinary than that assumption, the kind that builds up so gradually in a person that it stops feeling like a judgment and starts feeling like just the way things are. He looked at my mother's paper towel and my father's sport coat and the way we sat 3 rows back, and he assembled a story. It was a wrong story, but it was a human one. What I've learned, and I mean learned the hard way, over years in rooms where I was underestimated before I opened my mouth, is that the most powerful thing you can carry into any situation is not the thing people can see. It's not your clothes or your car or what neighborhood your parents live in. It's what you've actually built inside yourself when nobody was watching. My brother built a medical career 1 overnight shift at a time. He didn't complain about it. He didn't use it as a reason to cut corners or expect shortcuts. He understood that the work was the point, that showing up with integrity, even when it was exhausting, even when it would have been easy to do less, was the only foundation worth standing on. That's not a lesson you learn in a classroom. It's a lesson you absorb from watching your parents. I built something too, in my own way. I was good at numbers, good at seeing patterns in data that other people missed. And I worked at that skill with the same stubbornness my father applied to everything he told himself. Not to impress anyone. Not to have a moment someday where the tables turned and I could watch someone recalibrate their assumptions about me in real time. Though I'd be lying if I said that moment didn't feel. in some very small and private way, like a kind of completion. But here's what I actually believe, standing on the other side of it. The work you do in the quiet years is never really about the moment when someone finally sees it. It's about who you become in the doing of it. My parents never expected recognition. They expected themselves to show up fully every single day for the people they loved. That's a kind of moral seriousness that doesn't announce itself. It just accumulates. And eventually, whether anyone intended it or not, it shapes the people those parents raised. Claire's father said, "My brother's sister was the smartest person in the room." My brother laughed when he told me. I laughed too, a little. But what I thought, sitting with that later, was that the smartest thing I ever did was simply pay attention to two people who never once asked to be noticed. Our family doesn't advertise, we never had to.